Hey everybody, welcome to another One.7 Design Hangouts, number 6, I believe. I'm joined this time by Sage Latorra, who requires no introduction, I don't think. But Sage, why don't you maybe say something about yourself?
Sure. I'm one half of the team that designed Dungeon World, and I've done a lot of other smaller projects along the way. A small superhero game called Powers for Good, a Lady Blackbird hack called Old Messiah that I just found in my drive recently, and I'll probably distribute again somehow. All kinds of little things, but mostly Dungeon World.
Cool. Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that because I just found that as well. A hard copy. I was going through some old papers, mostly from the Wednesday game group that we're a part of, and yeah, I had a printout of Old Messiah tucked in the back of one of the folders. I was like, oh man, yeah, Old Messiah. Like that was one of the first Lady Blackbird hacks, I think.
Yeah, and I really like how that game turned out. Like looking back through it, it's a lot of the early stuff I designed. I go back to it, I'm like, oh, blessed. It's like, oh, it's nice to look back and see where it came from, but none of it is stuff that I'm like excited about anymore. But I was looking through Old Messiah, and I was like, okay, this needs a little tightening up, and like I've learned a few things, but I still stand behind this.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really solid premise, and the characters are cool, and yeah, I think it's worth drawing attention to again. Maybe doing a little re-release or something for it. For people who don't know, it's a Wild West kind of thing. Not Wild West, but like an old West, I guess you might say.
Yeah, it's a little more grounded. It's semi-vaguely historical, and it's set around the parts of New Mexico that I grew up in and went to school in and everything. So there's a few things there that are probably only amusing to me and other people who went to New Mexico Tech. But it tends to turn into a bit of a blood opera because everybody has somewhat conflicting things that they're trying to get done, and it builds on Lady Blackbird and adds a couple of tiny mechanical tweaks, but nothing huge. And it also has the historical distinction of being the game that introduced Adam and I to each other at Go Play Northwest years and years ago. I offered to run this Lady Blackbird hack that I brought, and some hipster in skinny jeans comes up and is like, oh, a bunch of my friends want to play. And so I ran it for him, and then we're like, oh, we should follow each other on Twitter, and then Dungeon World.
Well, that's cool. I didn't know that. That's funny.
That was actually the game, yeah.
So it must have been, was it the following year that you played?
No, it was actually during that same Go Play that we played
really?
Tony's Apocalypse D&D, which is where Dungeon World started. Like he's the one who actually entered, because some people might know this. I know John does. Apocalypse D&D is what became Dungeon World. It's $20 game that he put together, and it was very clearly like a hack that you needed both an Apocalypse World rulebook and an AD&D player's handbook to play. And then I had such a great time playing it that I ran it a few times at Go Play. I think Adam was in one of those games as well, maybe. And then afterwards, I started putting together my own character sheets and tweeted a picture, and Adam's like, I want to help you with those. And here we are all these years later with an LLC and all this crazy stuff.
Funny how that works out, huh?
Exactly, yeah. We went from like randomly following each other on Twitter and being like, oh, that's a cool thing you're making, to, yeah, having a company named after both of us and stuff.
Yeah, kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's, looking back on it, it's been a crazy few years.
Well, it's a good thing. I think obviously Dungeon World has been a huge success and continues to be one. I know you guys are coming out with the supplement Inglorious, I believe it's called. Fairly, I don't know when exactly, but sometime in the future here.
We try to copy the Blizzard line of like we'll ship it when it's finished, and we'll continue to do previews. Hopefully, we'll actually have one pretty soon here. But we're I don't know, we're such hackers that we keep on thinking like, oh, let's just tweak it a little bit more. And this is actually one of the things that I've had this like super creative urge since Gen Con, because at Gen Con I kind of realized how many people like it's okay not to go for perfection for everything. Like it's kind of more important in some cases to just get stuff out there. And I think that trying to be a little less perfectionist, whatever, excuse me, will help that game a lot. And like it's in a good state. We've played with it a lot. We've got tons of cool stuff in there, and just saying like this is a cool thing we made instead of this is the absolute, you know, inheritor to Dungeon World in the form of a supplement. Because like I was looking through the Dungeon Crawl Classic stuff, and those guys put out a lot of material and don't privilege too much of it. There's not oh, excuse me. There's not too many things there that come across as like the big important supplement. There's just a lot of adventures, and a lot of them are good, and it's okay to just make a lot of good things as opposed to like this perfect, amazing inheritor. Which has also led me to revisiting a couple things. You and I talked earlier this week about an adventure that John ran during the late playtesting phases of Dungeon World that has kind of been in my head ever since. And I'm thinking that I'll probably revisit that and turn it into a published thing. Because I'm also working on laying out Jason Morningstar and Marshall Miller's Juntu's Floating Ice Hell, which is an amazing adventure, and it kind of got me pumped about Dungeon World Adventures again. So yeah, all kinds of stuff.
Cool. I'd love to talk briefly about that Dungeon World adventure, the one that you're working on, if you want to.
Yeah, the one that you ran, the Castle of the Flaming Skull.
Yeah, Sage, for those who don't know, Sage and I have run a game group together on our Wednesday night crew, and it's been several years now. I forget exactly, 4 or 5 now. I don't know exactly.
Since we originally started game with that group?
Yeah.
Oh, longer than that. It's gotten closer to 5 at least.
5 at least, yeah. Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And when towards the end of Dungeon World playtesting, like right at the very end, I think, I had either just watched or was about to watch Army of Darkness again, and I think I just watched it, and we had talked about Ghostbusters all the time about how it was this great Dungeon World movie, but Army of Darkness really hit me. I was like, oh yeah, like this is tonally it's really nice because you get this fantasy world with magic and stuff, but you also get to have this irreverent kind of comedy if you want, and you can also, if you wanted, and we like sat at the table and sort of talked this out, like, oh, maybe we should have the option to play like normal people from Earth that have been like drawn into this fantasy world, and
we ended up expanding a bit and saying that like the real Earth, with big scare quotes around real, had like collided with this fantasy world kind of. So we ended up with a wizard whose spell book was a PDA, the mythical figure Ajax, a Dungeon World paladin whose order was all about like keeping the worlds distinct or something like that. Oh, and then the
character.
Yeah, the teenage bard who played the guitar and whose name was Tiffany with a heart over the eye.
yeah, my favorite Dungeon World bard of all time.
Good.
And yeah, the worlds, I forgot that detail. They had like physically collided. Mm-hmm. So like the entryway to the tower of the evil mage was like a movie theater lobby, I think. There was a whole bunch of
running through that first layer, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember we ended up in a relatively large battle in a movie theater that was magically playing Tommy. Oh yeah, because we talked about how like my character probably died to like Pinball Wizard or something, and
Shannon, for her character, she had made a playlist on her iPad, and so when she used her bard magic, she would like pick a song from the playlist and play it at the table when we were doing it. So she probably played that when we were during the session. It was awesome.
Yeah, Shannon DJing games was really good. We also had the Monster Hearts game where we started kind of soundtracking our Monster Hearts game, which was the best idea ever. That adds so much to that game.
Yeah, totally. Having it done live at the table is great, but also just even like having it in the conversation where you're like, oh, this would totally be this like really moody like Imagine Dragons thing right here, and like everybody is like right in the moment of the teen TV series kind of vibe.
Yep. Well, and it's nice. It lets everybody kind of communicate in the way that we're used to seeing this stuff. I mean, most of the people that I game with have not been in an actual teenage situation for quite some time. So when we're playing Monster Hearts or something, sure, there's a little bit of that kind of like, oh, remember you're a teenager, but it's more so like, remember all of these teenage movies and dramas and stuff. And so you might as well play to that. Like, I think that's one of those skills that people can develop in role-playing is ways to communicate with your group in ways that make sense. And for our group, the soundtracking and stuff totally. Plus, we had the killer moment where there was a magical ring, put it on a dying person, and we're like, okay, this is the end of the session. So, like, if this was a TV show, it'd be zooming out from like the ring on the finger, and Shannon's just like, and the music is single ladies, put a ring on it, and that sealed that session. That session was in the can. It was perfect.
Oh yeah, that was so good. I'm excited to see what you do with the module. I think it'll be cool. It'll be a nice, potentially a good intro thing for Dungeon World. I think to let people into that game in a way that's very forgiving. You can like say all your stupid jokes and references and play characters that are irreverent and not that Dungeon World takes itself that seriously anyway, but it's just sort of one notch further on that dial, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a deliberate choice that we made early on to like have the character archetypes and stuff build on pop culture instead of trying to like kind of like hide the influences. We were just gonna flat out put them in the move names and the abilities and stuff. And the funny part is because Adam and I aren't one person. Sometimes we have different backgrounds in these things. So there's been a move in Inglorious since the very early days there's a compendium class for being kind of a spy. Once you've stolen secrets from people, I think is the qualification for entrance, then you get cool spy type stuff. That's a little different from thief because it's a little more social and stuff. But there's a move there that basically gives you the ability to, in any situation, you always have kind of a poison pill on yourself, and if it's too much, you can say like, no, I die. They can't get the information out of me. And it has a couple other effects as well, because that's a limited effect. But the name of this move that Adam named since the very beginning has been Leto's Gambit, I think. And I had never read Dune. So it wasn't until just maybe a year ago when I read Dune that I was like, oh, he's been making this reference the entire time, but I had no idea. This is why the Flaming Skull, that adventure works so well, because there's already a bit of a pop culture mashup in Dungeon World, and it works best, I think, when the characters can engage with that relatively seriously, but we as the players can have that kind of like fun distance from it. We know that my paladin died to Pinball Wizard, but to him this was like the magical screen that's portraying strange men from the future, and like it was all serious in the game, and we laughed our asses off about it.
Yeah. That's a nice combination. And then also with like Shannon's character, who is like someone from our Earth, but also in the past, so she's also kind of a trope. But she gets to drop these references, and your character gets to play the Spock straight man who like doesn't understand what she's talking about, and it just instantly, it's very easy to role play. It's not like be dramatic and interesting and create a deep character with meaning, and you can play these very sort of shallow, simple roles that let the game kind of roll along, and they don't put a lot of pressure on everybody.
Exactly, and that's I mean, I know a lot of people do play Dungeon World with a lot more drama brought to the game, but I mean, the way that I run it, and we played a lot together, like I Dungeons World to me is lighthearted entertainment for the most part, and like sure sometimes there'll be that kind of like dramatic moment where you're like, oh yeah, you turn on your friends, like we all know this is dramatic, we appreciate that, but most of the time it's fun, it's adventure. It's not even like the epic grand adventure. Like when we did the Flaming Skull, both Paul and my characters died, and Shannon's bard with her guitar was the only one to make it out alive and organize a new expedition in.
Yeah.
But yeah, because
Yeah.
both Ajax and the Wizard with a PDA were both Paul, and then I had the Paladin, and then I decided to play a cleric from the same order, who had a big old mace, and he was Wesley the Crusher. Oh, that game was just so good. Yeah, thinking back on that, and part of this was at Gen Con, I played an event that the DCC guys put on called Catastrophe Island, which was a funnel well, not quite a funnel. Each person only had one character, but a large group, people are going to die like crazy adventure that they had multiple tables going at the same time, and everybody was on kind of their own islands, and then there was a big spinner on one of the tables, and every so often the organizers would spin the spinner and do things like swap the GMs between two tables or all this kind of stuff. And the conceit was that all our characters were Earth kids who had gone on some ride at the fair, and the ride had spit them out onto Catastrophe Island, which was actually an island with velociraptors and whatever. Got to do the Jurassic Park dance to try and calm some velociraptors. But there's just so much fun there in that, like, you're playing your character, and they're a way to interact with these tropes and this genre in another interesting way. I mean, it's fun playing straight up adventures as well. I actually played some DCC in that mold at Gen Con, but it's so great to sometimes mix that up. And it's kind of been in D&D to some degree, like Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, while you're not doing quite the time travel thing. It's definitely got a bit of the genre mashup effect to it. That it's just fun. I don't know. It's been on my mind a lot, and when we played that adventure, it was so great. So hopefully, I'm going to put together a version of that other people can play, and I'm thinking I may have some alternate playbooks, because we kind of did some hacking on the fly. But I think it'd be fun to throw a few of these things out for other people, so that if you're playing the bard from the present or the bard from Earth as opposed to the bard from Dungeon World, you kind of get a slightly different set of abilities. But we'll see. All early brainstorming at this point.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. That made me think of something. I just blanked on. Oh, right. Yeah, it reminded me of. There was an Agon session that I wish I could remember his name right now. I feel bad. I think it was at Gen Con. They ran a table with the heroes on the quest with a laptop, and they ran another game with the gods. I forget if they were playing. It was a totally different game with the Greek gods in another room, and the heroes could like Skype call the gods when they did their divine sacrifices and stuff, and like ask them for favors and things.
Nice.
So yeah, it is nice to have that occasional like, yeah, this game is fun on its own, but you can add this layer to it that creates a different dynamic or mixes it up or.
Yeah, and I think that there's lots of room for that in gaming in general. I mean, so much of the time when we, like as gamers, when we interact with a genre, we're coming at it from wanting to engage in those tropes. Like when you read a book, or I shouldn't say you, when I read a book, often I'm not looking for something that, fits exactly to the kinds of tropes that I expect. Like reading the kind of generic fantasy novel has never quite been my thing, but playing the generic fantasy game is great. And I can just be like, oh no, these are, and then we'll twist those and all that. But I feel like a lot of people come to gaming starting like wanting to a degree, just the straightforward stuff. Like you don't have to get fancy. And I think that this is actually great advice for running games is you don't have to get fancy to start with. Like you can get there eventually, but to start with, like you don't have to make your dungeon world this crazy special dungeon world. You don't have to make your danger patrol some weird twist on it. Like just play pulp heroes, just play fantasy adventures, and then sure, you can mix it up later, but the people come to the game looking for the easy way, and you're setting yourself up for success. Like,
Yeah, it's much easier, and sometimes having that baseline it gives people permission sometimes to do something their own way, or kind of easily be creative. If you just say, okay, we're pirates and we're raiding this island, and it turns out that it's haunted. That's the adventure, and that lets them play against type if they want to. They can say, oh well, no, my pirate is like this ex-Jesuit priest who like knows how to exercise things, and it gives, if everything is weird and beautifully perfectly honed and crafted, you can feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to mess with this, I'm not supposed to change things up. But if you can kind of give this baseline of something easy and that'll more or less guaranteed to work, people can feel more comfortable with adding their own ideas, or not feeling like they're ruining something.
Well, and it's super useful because when, like, even within an easy genre like that, the things that are obvious to you aren't going to be obvious to me. This is, I've heard several people say this in RPG technique discussions, so I can't attribute it to one person, but the thing that's obvious to me isn't obvious to you necessarily, and if I try to get crazy creative, that may not be as effective as just throwing out the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, the first time I saw that was in Graham Walmsley's book, Play Unsafe, I think. But I think it's an old improv technique about trusting your own instincts, essentially. Like you said, people sometimes be afraid of, well, I'm not going to say that because it's so obvious, but yeah, everyone's brain, it's weird because we're all different and we're all kind of on the same page in gaming sometimes.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a real strength of the hobby, and it's a source of endless entertainment because getting on the same page feels really good and building consensus is really good, but the act of role playing constantly like churns that up and asks us to break out of consensus and surprise each other, and the dice surprise us, and you get that really great back and forth of, we're all in this together, and then, oh wow, I'm so surprised by what you just did. It's really cool. I think the best TV and film kind of does that. I forget what film critic said that, but about how a surprise in a movie should be surprising and inevitable at the same time, and gaming does that all the time. It's cool.
Yeah, I actually had that experience with a film recently. I watched Kingsman: The Secret Service, which I'd seen these trailers for, and it had not stood out. But
the trailers didn't interest me. I haven't seen it yet.
It turns out the way that I feel like they should have pitched it is, it's kind of the midpoint of how Bond could have evolved. So like, there's the modern Bond movies that are very kind of grim and serious, and they've got a tiny bit of humor, but they're great action movies, but they're very serious. And then there's like the Austin Powers, which is deliberately mocking the idea of Bond movies. But then there's this kind of middle road that neither of those do, which is like, you keep going with the kind of crazy Bond movies, but you don't make fun of them. You just go for a gonzo Bond movie with like crazy gadgets and crazy action and a lot of humor. And that's basically where it ends up at. And there, in this case, it's music cues. There's music cues in it that they use the perfect songs, the perfect moments, that once you see it, you're like, oh yeah, that was inevitable. That was going to happen. They planned everything. But when it first happens, I was doubled over laughing at some of these. And it's a fun action movie. Like, there's really good action scenes, well choreographed, all this stuff. But then again, in my viewing, I think it also benefited from low expectations. I came in kind of being like, I just want a movie to watch. And so it far surpassed the low expectations. Now that I've hyped it, everybody's going to say that's horrible. But it's worth seeing for a couple of musical cues, if nothing else. And it's this interesting middle path of finding a third way to approach the genre, kind of.
That sounds cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out.
which I guess loops back to the way we were just talking about genres. Like it's taking like a slight distance from it, but not a mocking distance. It's not playing James Bond completely straight, but it's also not making fun of James Bond.
Yeah, that's interesting. That can be a hard thing to do in film, I think, to get a tone exactly right. But in gaming, it feels like, because we're always kind of micro adjusting all the time and modulating what we say and watching each other's reactions and kind of like really in tune. Tone can sometimes be a challenge, but I think overall, gaming is a lot easier than pre-produced art to dial in a tone, and you get a lot of tries to get it right too.
Yeah, I think that it benefits a lot from the fact that it can be a back and forth on tone.
Yeah,
that gives us the ability to fine tune it a lot more. And even then, I've definitely had games that have fallen down on that.
Yeah.
Though, for me, and this I think is partially just the people that I've played most of these games with, but it's often been with GM-less games. And I think that's not so much because the one person has to set the tone, but because it's easier to manage the tone in a conversation that's mostly between two people at a time.
Yeah.
So like just having one person, like the nature of a GM in a game tends to create conversations that are more one-on-one with maybe another person kind of coming in and out or something. And that makes it a lot easier for us to do that back and forth on tone. Whereas when we're all involved in the conversation at the same moment, it's not even like equally like that. I feel like GM and player can be very equal in the conversation. And just the fact that it's two people as opposed to 4 or 5 all at once keeps us on track. And the games that most solve for this, like Microscope, setting up the palette in Microscope is a great tool for that. But each time I play, I don't want to spend that long setting up. Like, I don't want to spend that long having that conversation. I always feel like by the time that we've set the palette and gone once around the table, I'm like, okay, I'm done playing Microscope. Like, that fun game, guys.
Yeah, I've had that experience too. Well, not every time I played Microscope, but there have been times when that's happened. And I think the new version of Microscope has some.
Our cats are running around here.
Nice. It has some elements to address that. And Jackson's hack of Microscope, Kaleidoscope, has a built-in there's still kind of a palette thing, but you mostly kind of skip it in order to create your weird. If you guys haven't seen Kaleidoscope, go rush and get it right now. It's free. It's a rehack of Microscope, and you you recreate a weird foreign film that you all remember seeing, and the eras are like scenes from the film, and you like talk about the weird subtitling in that one part, and why was there always a dog in every scene, and you like come up with this weird. You make up the director and you make up the film as you go. It's really, really cool. And it doesn't really suffer. I was going to say, what I've noticed in GM-lessness sometimes is what you were talking about, that's kind of Ouija board effect, where because there's no particular authority, no one feels like they're moving the thing around, but it's moving around. And it can like slide into places that no one person wanted it to end up. But because nobody said like stopped it and nobody really tried to get there, it's like this weird, like everyone's at the 4-way stop and they're all waving each other to go. And it's this like strange thing. And I think often good game design comes in and like breaks that up and makes it work out. But sometimes in those GM-ful games, I've seen that happen where lots of little decisions end up in a thing that nobody wanted at all. And we kind of sit there and go, wait, hang on, let's stop and roll that back. How did we get here?
And I'm not entirely convinced that it's about, how did you phrase it, responsibility or power or something like that. I'm not entirely sure that it's that one person has more responsibility for a certain thing. I think that it's partially just in the fact that we're almost working in smaller groups, like with the exception of maybe big action or debate kind of scenes, most times there's kind of an automatic spotlighting that happens, even in like a dungeon crawl or something. One person's like, I go up to the door and the GM kind of talks with that person for a little bit. And I think that that gives us a lot more chances to do that negotiation, that micro negotiation that we're not even sure we're doing. Instead of it being like in the GM full game thing. Well, like when I play Fiasco, I've had a couple of groups, and usually Fiasco is great for me, but I've had a couple of groups that kind of start going in weird directions, even for Fiasco. And it's tough because everybody's contributing it all the time. It's a little harder to communicate those little, like, hey, let's head back this way. Like, let's not bring in space aliens or whatever.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I've definitely seen that. There is that interesting dynamic. We talked about this on Twitter a few weeks ago, I think. That shifting in and out of, being like directly involved, usually with the GM or one-on-one with another player, and kind of like being an audience member in the game, and then a kind of third mode of like resetting or recharging your battery or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And shifting in those modes in a GM'd game, there's those different spaces to occupy, and in a GM full game, sometimes you're kind of always on stage, sort of.
Yeah.
And it can feel every time I play a game like that, or a game that's very intense in that same way, like Troll Babe is kind of like this too, even though it has a GM. Back when we used to play Troll Babe a lot, we would play for like an hour and be like, oh my god, like I'm wiped, like, because it's just like constant. You're just really on, and you don't necessarily have that kind of in and out, back and forth thing going on. I wonder if that contributes to it too. I don't know. But.
No, I think that definitely does, because I think that part of the shifting of your perspective through those different modes helps you gain different perspectives on what's happening and kind of refocus to a degree. I think the kind of constant, like, I'm always here, I'm always trying to add stuff, makes it easier to veer off, because you don't have those moments to step back and consider, like, where are we? I think you gave me this advice for Inspectors. Like so Inspectors, for people listening along, is a game where there's kind of a Ghostbustery mystery, but it's not like a mystery game where there's not like a canonical answer that the GM has really set out with like a trail of clues or something. It's more of a kind of like, we can figure out what it is as we go along. We're just here to have fun. But it's important to get people to recap the information they have so far. And Inspectors has a tool built in, which is the great advice you gave me. Inspectors is a game where you're also on a reality TV show, so you can do kind of confessional booth things. And getting everybody to do confessional booths to recap where we are on the mystery is a really important thing to make the mystery come together. Because otherwise everybody just keeps on piling on details, and we don't have that chance to step back and realize, like, oh wait, here's what we've established so far. And it doesn't have to make sense, but we at least have a perspective.
Yeah, and in Inspectors, there's like a countdown everybody can see. You're building your mission. This is like 11 dice worth of mission or whatever. And when you do stuff, you add to it. So you can tell when you do your confessional, there's like 2 more dice left or whatever. So you can say something that will kind of like push things shut. Or if you're at the beginning or the middle, you can, you can modulate, where you are in the process. So that makes sense.
It makes it really easy to do the thing where, the confessional or the voiceover kind of says, oh, and then we figured out like that this all could fit together because of the old man in the military who had left a weird experiment in his like, it gives you that chance to suggest a way to tie everything together and to remind everybody, like, hey, you have all that has to go somewhere. It's a smart design, and I think when I had first tried running it, I think this is why you gave me this advice, I'd had problems getting missions to really come together, because it's easy to just kind of keep on spitballing them. But the game's already got the confessional thing in there to help you get back on track. You just have to remember to use it effectively.
Yeah, and I wonder, now that you're talking about it this way, it reminds me of, we've had many conversations about in real life about this as well, about particularly the Wednesday group. penchant for table talk, and how we've kind of developed this very useful, very productive conversation, which I think traditionally is called metagaming among gamers. I always hated that term, but in a way, it's kind of like the Inspector's Confessional, which that's in character, but we have this interesting sort of like commentary track happening when we game, where we're playing the scene and we drop in and speak in our character's voice and drop out and describe what they look like and how they're acting, and then move up and talk about their feelings and their motivations that led up to this, and then pull all the way out and like talk about kind of what the game is like right now and how it reminds us of that thing in Spartacus, and that makes somebody think about betrayal, and they wonder if one of the characters is going to go the same way that this character on Spartacus went, and we drop back into character voice, and it's this crazy, like, very natural, very seamless switching of stances, I guess, as a technical term. And that's something we've talked about before in real life, but and
it's really important. Like I've seen some of your early drafts on Blades and kind of talking about this, and I'm glad that somebody is talking about it, because I do think it's important. Like sometimes I've seen people running games and they try to shut down the table talk, and I mean, I guess I don't like to ever be kind of the one true way kind of person. I think there's probably situations in which that's a great idea. Like you want to focus on just one stream of the conversation, but that's not really for me. Our approach of all of these different layers, and especially like we do a lot of the layer where we talk about our character's feelings. We give everybody this big insight into like why we're playing our character this way. And it'll often be stuff like I'll say my character like, oh yeah, he doesn't trust this guy at all, but he's going along with it because he doesn't want to let on that he hasn't figured out what's actually going on, or something like that. And I'll just tell everybody that so that you guys know, like when my character does this weird thing, we're like, oh yeah, okay, that's why. And it adds it makes everything more enjoyable. Like it's more direct communication, and it gives context to how I'm playing my character, because I mean we're not like actors. We can't portray this entirely with sitting in a chair and making a funny voice. So we use all the tools that are available. We talk about it directly.
Yeah, in a way, that part of those multi-channel conversations is taking the place of a visual medium that we don't have. We aren't going to really perform the way an actor in a melodrama would perform. We're not going to have the music underneath what we say that gives it this sinister aspect. We don't, manage every little shot, so they look back at the right moment and we realize that they knew all along or whatever. So we have to say those things in order to get them out into the space of the game. And I think some people come into gaming with this expectation that they're supposed to sort of perform the game and not break the illusion, this like very fragile bubble that's being created. And you don't want to pop it. You don't want to like take people out of the moment or anything like that. And obviously there's value to that. You can sort of ruin a moment. You can disrupt the flow of the game by mismanaging what you're saying. But I feel like it's the fear is much larger than the issue. The issue is fairly minor, little hiccup, and the fear of doing it wrong, I think, can sometimes loom large in gaming.
Yeah. Well, and it's I mean, without those tracks, where it's almost like reading the script to a play, like that's somewhat enjoyable. But I'd much rather see, Romeo and Juliet. Oh, geez, I have to go with the most cliche thing because it's the first play that come to mind. But I'd rather see that performed.
Trust your first instinct, Sage.
What was that?
Trust your first instinct.
Hey, at least it's something that everybody will know. But no, like without like the way that we are at the table, we're not gonna. Most of us aren't great actors. We're not gonna bring the nuance of somebody who's like rehearsed this script and can really portray it. So it's kind of like reading the dialogue from a play. Like you You get the bare minimum. You get a little bit of kind of inflection from stage directions and like the obvious things that are written in there. But unless we also talk about it in other terms, we're only getting a fraction of what we could be getting out of the game. And that comes in a lot of forms, like when describing your character's actions, like when we just kind of say like I take an attack action or whatever, like that doesn't that's like the stage direction. And if we talk about it even just a little bit more like the movie, like it doesn't have to be the grand description from like the book or something, but it just giving everybody something else to be going on than the mere stage direction of he attacks him adds a huge amount.
Sorry, I was muted. I feel like we get there are occasionally in our games sort of actor moments that really pay off, and there's a line or a delivery that's really awesome. But
oh yeah,
most of the time when we sort of all go, whoa, oh my God, like that was amazing, when we have those kind of moments, it's because of that stage direction thing or the mental state thing where someone says, yeah, but she doesn't reach out and take your hand when she does that. And everyone goes, oh shit. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing, like you said, like that's going to come across in a nuanced performance on screen, or even just if we're pretending that these are real people, these fictional real people sitting in a room together would be getting so much more from each other than we're able to portray sitting at the table, having a beer together. So having that sort of bringing it out explicitly in the conversation lets it be part of the game.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I think one of the other things that draws a lot of those moments is also the mechanical interactions, for lack of a better term. Like when somebody points out that they have the ability on their sheet that has been rarely referenced, but has obviously been there the entire time, that means that like this situation is totally under control. That often gets the kind of the reaction that we all remember, or taking the tearing up your character's Bible to get a helping dice to start a fire, like that kind of stuff. Getting the mechanical thing there comes across as big as the description, which is important. Like there's an interplay between these things. Like as much as we're talking about description now, you also don't want to go like too florid and too like we're just going to describe and commentate. Like the stuff that's actually happening moment to moment is the heart of the game in some ways. But it's important to build those other levels in as you want them and as you need them.
Yeah, totally. And it speaking of mechanics, it goes the other way too sometimes, where in the Apocalypse World game we just did on Twitch, so many, like once per session at least or more, somebody would say something about what a character did or what their PC was doing, and it would trigger a move. Yep. Usually a read where, Adam would say, yeah, he comes in, but he doesn't put his back to the door and he's like looking at all of you. And I'm like, nope, I read him. I read a person. Something's fishy with this guy. I don't trust him.
Yeah.
And having that extra layer can also, like, especially in an Apocalypse World style game, sometimes a thing you say is a trigger for a move, even if it's not like the literal action someone is taking. It can snowball into that move by starting a little further away. Sometimes you kind of get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the levels of discussion are huge for that. And it's interesting because that leads me to one of the games I got to play at Gen Con. I finally got to try one of the Cypher System games. So I played Strange, which the thing that stuck out to me the most was a moment where we had the conversation that was entirely about the rules, not about, like, it was a conversation that only took place at the mechanical level. And it wasn't just a explain the rules, because sure, there was a bunch of new people, so there was explain the rules, but the Cypher system has this thing where you have these pools of points. You can spend them to make your rolls better. And as first level characters, we can only spend 3 points at a time, and those 3 points would change your target number on a d20 roll by 3, which basically means that it's a 15% difference in your chances of success, which is not huge. And you have, depending on which pool you're in and your individual characters, maybe between like 9 to 16 of these points or something. But it means that we spend a lot of time discussing, oh, okay, you're about to roll, you need a 15. Are you going to spend points? And none of this entered back into any other level of the discussion. Like if we said we spent points, then we crossed some points off and the number was now different. But nothing, we didn't have anything to talk about. There was never that like, oh, so you spent points. How does your character do that? Or, what are you doing? Or here's the consequences of doing that. It was just, mark off some points.
Presumably the points are attached to an attribute or something?
They basically are your attributes, and they're also what you take damage to.
Okay.
So, which makes it even funkier because the GM doesn't roll. So you could be spending points on kind of your avoid and attack roll, where if you fail the roll, you're going to lose points. So, being a bit of a math person, this immediately leads me to being like, okay, wait.
Oh, so yeah, right. Yeah, that's
points for a 15% chance, chance of not losing 4 points if I fail this roll.
Yeah.
Like sitting there being like scratching my head like, oh, what's, is that really worth it?
That's your math right there, right? Like there's $100 in the pot. I only need to spend 5 to call, and I have a 5% chance of winning. I'm priced in, right? So you can easily get into those positions when the math is that transparent.
And it was interesting because there are other things about the game that I liked a lot, but this is the thing that stuck with me the most, and why I don't think I'm likely to go back to those games much.
That's really interesting too, because I have the game I'm running on Thursdays right now is this like techno thriller spy game based on 24, the TV show, more or less. And the system I came up with for that is a system where you can spend points from pools to modify your chance of success on percentile dice by 10% per point you spend.
Yep.
But there's no limit. You can spend as much of your pool as you want at once, because you're hyper competent badasses. I don't have to deal with the level 1 problem.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm going to look at now, because it hasn't happened yet where there's been. I mean, you don't take damage to them, so it doesn't have that issue. And the way the fiction comes in happens a lot before you spend your points. So. But yeah, now I'm going to definitely look for that and see if spending points is this kind of dry exercise, or if there's a way to make it more interesting.
And part of the thing here is that, and I haven't seen your design, there's nothing else modifying your roll, basically. Like the GM tells you this is a 15 task. So you need a 15, and it's not like you're rolling a d20 and adding a stat bonus or something. Like that task is a 15, and anybody who tries to do that task needs to get a 15, basically. Mm-hmm. Unless, and they wouldn't phrase it this way, but unless maybe there was fictional positioning of like you're trying to sneak up on somebody and one guy has a clunky super suit or whatever, and one guy has stealth gear. But it means that by default, like this as a player feels like the only way to say who your character is. Mm-hmm. Because, I've got a lot of points in my, what is it called, agility pool or whatever. Like, this is how I get to be agile, because otherwise this task is basically the same for anybody. And there's another small element into it where you can get a discount on points spent, basically. So maybe you can spend 2 points, but they behave you like 3.
Right. Yeah, I saw that in Numenera, I think.
It's the same system as Numenera.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's where it starts to feel a little more special. I think especially if you could get to the discount of 3, which I forget if there's some special rule about that or whatever. But if basically I could get 1 step easier for free all the time, I think that's where my character would start to feel like, yeah, I am really the agile guy. And sure, maybe I can spend points on top of that. And that's part of it, as like the level 1 characters who are still kind of presented as maybe not hyper competent, but very competent. These aren't, you know, first level Moldvay characters or DCC funnel characters or something. Like we were special agents who had mind psychic training or something. You can only spend 3 points on any. You can basically only do 1 thing on any given roll, which kind of hurts it to a degree. Like I would. It makes me feel like I can only kind of nickel and dime my points away, as opposed to being like, oh no, I'm going to nail this impossible shot on this guy. I put all of myself into it and like get hyper focused, and sure, I make the shot, but afterwards I'm like shaking because now my pool's down to like 3 or whatever. Like that would be a cool thing for me.
Yeah, I'm curious why they did that, because I considered that too when I first started working on this. Well, I've worked on this system for about an hour, so I shouldn't started working on it, but I needed a system for the game a couple weeks ago, so I'm sure Numenera was in the back of my mind somewhere. But yeah, I initially hit on that same solution and thought, oh, okay, we'll have it be, I don't want someone to just change a 50% to a 90%. Like that just blows everything out of the water. That's not what you want. And then I was like, what do I care? They spend 4 of their points. They only have 5 or whatever.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they want to spend all of them, they could spend all of them. It also makes the refresh really important, which is something I mess with a little bit on this design. Because if you're limited in spending and you have a deep pool, but the refresh always hits, you know, around 3 or 4, having a pool of 9 is pointless.
Yep.
Because you can only spend 3 and you're going to refresh, and you're like, oh, I have all these points, but you never dip down into the pool. So that's another reason I decided to not put a cap on spending. I wonder why they did that. I guess if you have to do levels and like a progression up the ranks, you want to have some kind of limits on the early characters. But
yeah, I think that's a big part of it. That like, so later on, you feel like you're that cool, but
yeah,
it ends up feeling like a bit of a mismatch in tone. Adventure that we were running an adventure from the publisher, or we were being run through an adventure by the publisher. You're like the remnants of kind of a Black Ops project that got shut down. And because I was playing with a bunch of my friends who were messing around, we basically ended up skewing more Men Who Stare at Goats than X-Files. But which was okay. Thankfully, our GM rolled with it. He was a saint when it came to our messing around. But the rules, like the tone of the game was kind of saying you're a badass secret agent. But the rules were kind of saying you're all right. Like we didn't feel like we were horrible, but there were so clear places to advance.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, and then the setting, the idea of the strain was really cool. The kind of connected worlds by some alien superhighway kind of thing, and we crossed over between rule worlds, and brilliant visual design. You have a second character, so you have your normal character sheet, which is a portrait 8.5 by 11, and then you've got a second character sheet, which is a landscape 8.5 by 11 folded in half that fits over your main character sheet and deliberately covers certain parts of it with who you become in this new world.
That's cool.
So, and it just looks cool and it feels cool to slide this thing on and be like, here's who I am. And now I actually need to, I hadn't got the Strange because Numenera didn't really hit for me. Now I do kind of actually want to get it just to learn more about how they advise GM prep for this. Because, you know, we were playing pre-made adventures, so the GM just handed out, like, you come to this world and you sprout alien armor. Cool. But I'm imagining as a GM, does this mean that, like, when we go to a new world, do I have to, ahead of time, prep new things for everybody? Or do we stop and everybody makes a new thing for their character? Or is there something else going on? because I imagine like the world jumping is clearly what I want to do a lot of, but if it's a lot of overhead, I could see that wearing out so fast.
Yeah, it seems like it might be. If I had to guess, which I do, it seems like you might like the worlds might be like your dungeon prep. You know, you spend your prep time making a world, and the players play the world, and when they've done that world, then you make a new one. It's like kind of you don't expect the GM to just go in a traditional kind of dungeon game. You don't think they're just going to pull out the next dungeon. They like kind of prep it first and stuff.
Yep.
So it's not something like that probably. Although it would be cool if they had like a bunch of pre-made sheets or something, and you could just print them out and have them ready to go. That would be pretty cool.
It immediately led to me wanting to hack it a little bit more for like I wanted to make them completely interchangeable. So you instead of, because it sure seemed like the things that we added to our characters were kind of deliberately made for those characters, because like they change your pools some and stuff. I kind of wanted to make it like your stats come from two sources almost, one source on each sheet of paper, so that you can just like, you don't have to make a custom one of that. The GM just prints out a few and says like, as you transition into this world, like you feel your body trying on new shapes. Which one do you take? And you just grab one and you're like, oh yeah, I'm the guy who sprouts alien armor. Cool. Instead of that guy who sprouts alien armor clearly being associated with the character you're already playing.
Yeah.
But it was a fun game, and like the concept is amazing. I just don't want to be spending points for my pools all the time.
Yeah, and it's an interesting design choice. Limited resources that are meant to be your kind of thing. You can get into those awkward situations where you go, "Why? I'm still a cat burglar. Why can't I do it anymore?" That has to be really integrated, or it doesn't have to be, but it's better if it is, obviously.
And they have some special abilities on the, like your character has special abilities, and they can do some of that. It's tough because they don't always interact with like normal roles. A lot of the ones that we had, at least, were very kind of special ability-ish. You know, it wasn't a, you're a cat burglar, you're really good at cat burgling. Instead, it was more like you can psychically disrupt people's senses or whatever. And some of those cost points, but actually at a lower rate, if I remember correctly. I think a lot of those were like spend 1 point, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, it was cool to play, and it's something that I do every year. When I go to Gen Con, I always try and sign up for a game that's just run by some gaming company or something. Like I want to get out of the people I'd normally have run games for me and the games I normally play, and just try something left field and kind of see how do random people at Gen Con play games.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's a good reason to go to Gen Con, right? You don't get it everywhere, so you might as well.
Yep. See how everyone else does it. And I think that's part of the fun with the amount of live stream games going on now. Like I watch them in like Titan's Grave, and I'm like, oh wow, like this is significantly different from how I'd run this game. That's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It's really exciting to see gaming as entertainment starting to blossom a little bit. Like it's still not totally there. Titan's Grave definitely has the best like production values and editing and packaging up role playing in a way that's not totally boring to watch, which is a huge achievement. But even like Twitch streamers or YouTube replays and stuff are sometimes pretty cool to watch, and I like it's stuff Adam's doing too, and JP and the role play guys. Like you said, it's not about like showing off the showcase of amazing gaming. It's like here's how we play, and if you do it differently, cool. You know, make your video and show us how you play. And we've kind of gotten, I feel like, at least in the internet community, the streamer community, I should say, there's not a lot of politics there. There's not a lot of sniping back and forth at each other and, you know, trying to one up and all that. It's just this, hey, we're doing it. We're sharing what we're doing. all the other sniping stuff still happens on forums and things and G+. But
I think it helps that the number of people doing it is still relatively low. Like any sufficiently small community tends to avoid too much sniping.
Yeah.
I think that it'll reach that point eventually. Sorry, you'll get sniped sooner or later.
I know it's bound to happen. But the other factor too that I really been enjoying is so many of these people aren't like seasoned role players.
Yeah.
They're usually gamers of some variety, but they haven't done a whole lot of role playing, and that's so much fun to watch, to see a brand new person, their instincts, how they interact with role playing, and I've seen this at PAX too a lot with a younger crowd of video gamers that have become interested in role playing that don't have a lot of assumptions about it and don't have a lot of stress or worry about what it's supposed to be. There's this kind of willingness to be like, okay, what am I, an elf? Okay, cool. What, I have like a bow or something? Okay, great. Like I shoot. Is there a goblin? I shoot arrows at it, and it's just this kind of diving in mentality, and
yeah,
it's been really fun to watch that.
And that's the most exciting thing about PAX. Like, I guess I don't usually kind of work PAX Prime, but PAX East I'll often work a booth at, and man, the amount of excitement there is just great. Like the number of people who come up and are excited and just willing to jump into something. They're like, okay, cool. This is a role-playing game. I haven't played these before. Like, tell me about it. And like you give them a little pitch, and they're like, okay, cool. Like, tell me more about this one. And the times that I've worked Gen Con, which are much fewer because I've got better things to do at Gen Con, you get much more of like people coming in with an agenda already a fair amount of the time, and that agenda being very relevant to the games being displayed there. They're either super excited about these games or are super skeptical of these games, as opposed to just being like excited about games in general. Like they're coming to it fresh and new.
Yeah, it's great. It's very cool to see. There was a period there where it looked like role playing was really fading, and man, now it just seems like it's everywhere. It's almost kind of mainstream. It's very cool.
Well, and from what I know at Gen Con, just word of mouth, everybody had some of the best sales ever for a Gen Con, especially within like the kind of think of it as my generation of designers, people who have put out games roughly Dungeon World-ish. Like their first game is Dungeon World's age or a little bit younger, maybe a tiny bit older. For a lot of us, it was one of the best sales, and like Dungeon World still sold maybe even better than it has in last year. Maybe just about the same, but like still for a game that at this point is gone through at least 3 or 4 Gen Cons of being publicly available, like ridiculous sales.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I heard the same from a lot of people. Titan's Grave, the story that I heard is that they brought a bunch of copies. They went on sale on Friday, not Thursday, and immediately sold out. So that some people from the who's publishing that? Whoever's publishing it drove to their warehouse Saturday morning so that when the warehouse opened, they could load up a truck, a bunch more copies, drive straight back to Indianapolis, and immediately put them on sale there.
Wow.
It was that popular.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so from what I hear, everybody did really well. I think that Mark Diaz-Truman, actually, I know he didn't quite sell out of copies of Cartel, which is kind of a crime because it was one of the coolest things that I saw there.
Yeah, oh man, I'm so excited about Cartel. You want to give a quick pitch if no one's heard of it?
Oh, yeah, sure. So Cartel is Mark Diaz-Truman's game of drug drama, I guess. It's a lot easier once you just mention that it's The Wire and Breaking Bad, basically. It's being people who are caught up in the drug trade. He's made a bold choice that I think I like of setting it around Durango, Mexico, and that is where you play. And he gives just enough information about what that means to kind of establish why that's a good place to play and why it's interesting. I do kind of wish that he had said it in New Mexico, because he and I are both from New Mexico, and I wish, with Breaking Bad and everything, I wish he would have gone there. But the game is so good. It's an Ashcan preview right now. She's only got a few playbooks, but they're so amazing. I think they probably skew a little more Breaking Bad than The Wire, mostly because there's currently no relatively straight cop. You can play a crooked cop, and you can play, but other than that, your only real option for not being directly involved in the drug trade is to be the spouse of somebody who is, or significant other of somebody who is, which is basically the Skylar playbook. And it's really good. Oh man, all the playbooks are so great. So to me, it definitely reads more Breaking Bad, but it does so well there. I only got a chance to read it. I have not played it yet, but I think when it comes to Apocalypse World hacks, I've got a pretty good sense these days, and it is high on my list of hacks to play. I also have like this mental list of things that I want to tell Mark that he should think about or consider, mostly because I want it to succeed so badly. But they're all relatively nitpicky. If anybody is listening to this and has a chance to pick up the few remaining copies of the Ashcan, do it. Also, because I think it may be your only chance to buy the game with the words like The Wire and Breaking Bad on the cover, because I'm not sure how long he's going to get away with that.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm also super psyched about it. It looks great. Like the graphic design of it so far is turning out really cool. I forget who did it. Maybe it was Brendan Reese, possibly.
I think so. My feeling was that the interior of the book probably needs a little more polish, but the cover, front and back cover, are both near perfect.
Yeah, I agree. It sells the tone really, really well.
Yeah.
The playbooks are great. And it's one of those things where, you know, we're in this community of hackers, which is awesome, and hacking Apocalypse World is awesome. Hacking Dungeon World, great. Obviously, we love all that. It's so awesome. But there's also a little bit of backlash sometimes where people kind of go, "Oh, another hack. Oh, yeah, it's Apocalypse World. I've seen a million of those." And I think every now and then, if that's true, that a game kind of it like doesn't really work as an Apocalypse World hack, or it's a little lazy or whatever. And Cartel is one of these games that it's like kind of like Monster Hearts, where you're like, oh man, this should be Apocalypse World. Like it uses the medium of Apocalypse World so well.
And he handles, like, you have to deal with addiction to some degree, and like what does being on drugs mean, and this is, I think, always something that games have handled in not great ways, often kind of immature ways, where it's kind of like, oh, you roll to see how high you are or whatever. Like the way he handles it is really good, and there's reasons that your character might end up on drugs, which I think is really smart. It actually, reading, there's a playbook that's basically the guy who cooks. It's Walter White at the beginning of Breaking Bad as opposed to the end. And reading over it, I was just thinking, like, man, I had never quite thought about the fact that Walter never goes on drugs, basically. It had never stood out before, but once I started thinking about it in these terms, it was actually kind of like, that's a deliberate decision that they made in how they wrote that series. Anyway, it gave me a whole new respect.
Yeah.
And the way that he presents the background that you need on the drug trade is smart. It's concise. It has that kind of Jason Morningstar touch of like just enough to give you the tone without making you stress out about the facts.
Yeah, I cracked open. Well, I haven't gotten the hard copy from you yet, but I cracked open the PDF
copy here.
Yes, you got it for me at Gen Con. Oh, thank you for that.
No
but I opened the PDF, and it starts with what I thought at first glance was some fiction, and which for me is always like kind of a turn off. Like I don't really like to read a lot of fiction when I open a game book. I think having fiction in a game book is cool, but you know, often it's kind of a slog to get through to get to what the game is. But Mark has really turned that to his advantage. It's not really fiction, I mean, it could be. It's hard to tell.
No, I'm 90% sure those are all true stories.
Yeah, and they're three very short stories, and he prefaces it by this nice little simple introduction where he's like, "Okay, for me to tell you what Cartel is, I need to tell you three short stories, and here they are." And they're just these little tiny vignettes, and I would normally flip past those pages and go into the game, and I read every word of those little snippets, and at the end of it, you know exactly what the game is about. And man, it's really strong.
I can only remember two of them off the top of my head, but I want to say that one of them was something that I remembered knowing to be true. Yeah, I think that those are all actual stories, or at least like commonly believed stories.
Yeah, well, I know Mark is kind of an expert on this topic, and you know, maybe he's changing a name here and there or something like that, but
it certainly isn't fiction, which I appreciate. I'm the same way when I open a book and see fiction. And recently, I've tried to force myself to read the fiction in a few more games, just to be like, man, maybe I'm just missing out. So, like, I read the fiction at the beginning of Newman Era. Still not for me. Just doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, because I know a lot of people love it, and that's cool. But for some reason, when my gamer brain is engaged, I kind of want to get to the thing about me making the fiction, and when I have to read the fiction, it kind of like, I don't know, it grinds my gears in some way. I don't know.
And I think part of it is that the stories are so important. They're brief. They're almost like short news reports, almost, but told with they're told very well, which helps.
Yeah, I really felt like Mark sitting at the bar being like, "Oh, you want to know about the drug trade? Let me tell you about this."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's lots of little things scattered through there that, like, growing up on the border, at least, I'd always heard were true. I mean, I trust Mark that they are true, but like this is part of why I'm so excited about this game, because Mark says that it's in some ways writing about, I believe he says in the intro that like this is something that he always wanted to write about, his culture, and while it's not my culture exactly, it's a culture that I grew up around, growing up right on the border with Mexico, and it's so cool to see it laid down that way, and I'm so glad that he's doing it. I'm really excited when people write about their cultures and their experiences through games, because we've had so much of people writing about other people's cultures and experiences, which sometimes can work out really well. Like Tekumal is immaculately researched, amazing, not by somebody with any personal relation to the culture that he's making a fictional version of, so far as I know. But 90% of the time, I'd say that it works out pretty badly. And seeing Mark write about that, and I've fallen in love with this OSR blog, Straits of Nine. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but it's a person of Pacific Northwest Indian descent writing about kind of a fictional setting in this Pacific Northwest area, based on their tales and everything, but for OSR D&D. I believe they're actually 1974 D&D, which is, it's just so fun. Like they're giving you their culture, not just their view of somebody else's, which to me makes it so much more interesting, and I feel like it makes it higher quality. I mean, maybe I'm reading into this because I know what's happening, but like Mark's description of these things, I think, is far better than the little chapters on drug trade or whatever that get snuck into every modern role-playing book.
Yeah, and I feel like too, there's a chance, like as an outsider to some of these cultures, my own experience in gaming, especially with historical gaming, has been this like deep appreciation for what we were doing that I never really got in my education. Like to some degree with certain professors every now and then, but when we just arbitrarily decided to run a game in 1500 Venice, you know, we spent a year in that place and time, and it was fictional and there was magic and stuff, but we really kind of learned that history in an interesting way. And it's exciting to think that certain cultures, especially ones that don't get attention or some American Indian tribes cultures are kind of dying out in a way, stuff like that. It's exciting to think that they could be captured and almost preserved in a sense in gaming, where people could go, they get into that world. And some video games are exploring that territory too right now.
Yeah.
But it transports you there in a way that just reading about it can do. But gaming is this like extra layer on top of it. You can't just consume it. You have to learn it yourself. You have to say stuff that's appropriate to that time and place and community. And yeah, man, it's super exciting.
I've had the same experience with board games. The Coin series, published by GMT, is all these games using modifications of the same system, but it's always counterinsurgency operations. Which, when I say this, some people are immediately like, "How could you play a game of these horrible conflicts?" But that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
So first of all, they're asymmetric games where people are also playing. Like if you're playing a distant plain, which is Afghanistan, somebody's playing the Taliban, and somebody's playing the warlords, the poppy farmers. And the amazing thing is, like, it partially by even though this is a board game with minimal, I mean, that you can negotiate with other players for like, give me some resources and I'll do this for you, but it's not exactly in character negotiation or something. And like, this isn't a model UN, or it's not even diplomacy level interaction. It's still, playing these games has every time given me more knowledge and more appreciation of the differing viewpoints going into these conflicts. Just because of the way you interact, like playing the poppy farmers in a distant plain, you're just like, wait, why did I think that these people, like, playing it from this perspective gives you an entirely different look at that conflict, which luckily I think these games are a great entry to that, but I don't think they can kind of communicate the full depth. So luckily these games have like bibliographies, like a lot of RPGs, where you can then go and be like, oh, okay, like, let me find out what was actually going on now that I have a bit of empathy for it.
Yeah, and for me, it made me really excited to research that stuff in a way that I've always been interested in history, but there's a different feel to it when you're like, oh, I really need to read this book because my NPC is this religious heretic that was burned at the stake, and I really want to understand why that happened. So in our game, I can bring that into what's happening. And I researched where italic type came from and why it was created, and it tied into our weird Venetic magic and all this. And yeah, it's like and like you said, traditionally, a lot of times those stories have been told by outsiders and have been repackaged and repurposed by people who didn't really understand the material. And having it come from the source, and Cartel is a great example of that, is just so exciting. It's a game. I've always wanted the apocalypse world crime thing, but I didn't necessarily know I wanted the Mexican cartel version of it. But now that it's here, like, duh, like it's just such a perfect thing.
And yeah, like, I don't think that it's only it's not always that you have to have a personal connection to it, but it sure helps. I mean, there are examples of people who have done great jobs on books that they obviously just researched through various means, but man, it sure helps. And part of it, I think, is even passion. Like, you can tell in Mark's writing that this is something that he's got a deep connection to. Like, he's bringing a lot to it. And especially, oh man, that introduction is just so good. Those 3 little stories of the drug trade.
Yeah, I know. I'm already I made a note in my Blades in the Dark document, like, cartel intro, like, just remember that. Try to. I almost just want to do it, because it's such a great technique.
And I'd be curious to see how it turns out for you, because for me, it somewhat bypassed that distaste for fiction, because I immediately read them and was like, I'm pretty sure this is all true. Like, this isn't fiction. This is it's almost more like historical information in a setting book in a way. Like it
kind of, yeah.
didn't trigger that like, oh man, somebody really wanted to be a novelist reaction that some of it gives me.
Yeah.
Not that all fiction in games is bad. Like I've been meaning to tell Paul Sega that Clay That Woke actually does it, because he and I have this ongoing thing, right? I basically said I do not like fiction in games, period. And he's like, let me see if I can prove you wrong. And proved wrong might be a strong phrase, but he definitely like made a dent in that opinion.
Yeah, that's good. It's I don't know. It's obviously a matter of taste because a lot of people like it, but
yeah.
Yeah, I think
we can sit here and try and convince everybody else that they should stop liking it, so they'll stop filling up books that we read with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Unless you're Mark Diaz Truman, in which case, please just, oh man, I throw in some more of those later on in the book because I'd read it, like, especially that tone. Oh, so good.
I know, yeah. A little bite-sized thing like that in every chapter would be awesome.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, one of my favorite novels, sci-fi nerd genre novels, is a Shadowrun novel.
Really?
2XS, Nigel Finley's book. Wonderful, wonderful cyberpunk novel that happens to be set in the Shadowrun universe. And at the time, the reason I read it was because I had ranted to someone about how I hated how Shadowrun books had all this fiction in them. And they were like, oh, you have to read this book. And I think Nigel had written some of that fiction in the game books too, but it's awesome. So yeah, it's possible to do it well, but when it's in a game book, my eyes glaze over.
Yeah, and I've really been challenging myself to like it. For a while, years ago, I was toying with an in nomine hack game. Like, let me do a nomine with mechanics that I like slightly more and try and boil it down some. And so I realized that, like, while I'm in nomine, I know the system pretty well, I know the book pretty well, I'd always just skipped the fiction. So I'm like, okay, I should read this if I'm going to try and hack this. Like, everybody else probably read it. It did not. It almost made me think that if I had actually read the book in order and started with that fiction, I would have been like, this game isn't for me. I'm just gonna, which I don't mean that as mean to them. Like, I think for a lot of other people, it totally sold them on what the book was. But I was,
sure.
Yeah, doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I feel like I should ask or bring up the topic briefly, perhaps, if we need to wrap up. But another project of yours that I'm very excited about used to be called Black Stars Rise.
Currently titled We Will Remain. Yeah.
Yes, We Will Remain. I think of it when I think of fiction because it has such strong ties to fiction that I love.
I don't know what to do with it. Like I feel like, so I've got a completed version of it. I've even tried starting to like kind of write into layout for a nicer like playtest document. And it's all there, but I'm still not sure that I'm kind of not sure what to do with it, I guess. Like it's this finished thing that I guess I could kind of give to people and stuff, but especially if I make the book, I have this idea of how I want the book to look. And I also feel like the last few changes I want to play with a little bit more, but I'm not quite excited to play that particular game at the moment. So what I need to do is finish up this playtest document and hand it out to people and get other people to play it for a little bit, and just because I mostly just kind of need a sanity check on a few things.
That seems like a good idea. Other people playing it and talking about it will probably reinvigorate that a little bit and spark that fire again, maybe.
Yeah, as I've been watching the new season of True Detective, because the first season of True Detective was part of what threw the game into focus and moved it from some of its roots. And it's interesting, now it's finally reached the point. So it was originally inspired by, in a weird sequence of events, both Call of Cthulhu, Tremulous, which is an Apocalypse World hack, and me finally going and reading Lovecraft and The King in Yellow and some of these stories, because I played a lot of Cthulhu. I'd never read the short stories. So basically Tremulous came out. I was excited about it. It didn't quite click for me, and I had some specific things that I really harped on, kind of. And then that made me want to go and read the original stories that inspired this, because it's kind of like, okay, maybe they're picking up on something that I haven't, because I've just played the game. I haven't read the source material. And then all that stuff came together into the early drafts of this stuff. And then in the early days, it was still much more. I mean, it's still kind of Apocalypse World based, but it had playbooks, which has the problem that once True Detective came out, like, obviously in that mold, you want to play two detectives. Why do we have different playbooks? Like, do I make two detective playbooks so that you can play the two detectives? And now with season 2, which is not as good, do I make 3 detective playbooks or 4? Or anyway, now there are no playbooks. Your character is just stats and a few things that you jot down, and all of your moves, the core moves of the game, are on double-sided cards, and that's how you take HP or take damage. Basically, you flip over cards. So that the way you do things changes as you get hurt, which is kind of the core conceit of the game. I think it's the killer feature. I totally stole it from in an early design of it. I said something that sounded like I meant you flipped over your move cards, and somebody misunderstood it and said like, oh, so the moves are on cards and you flip them over? And I was like, well, now they are. But yeah, it has a lot of good stuff. We've played it some. The flipping over the move cards works really well. Character change is not quite advancement. You have cards that you look at. Each session you reveal some cards, and at the end of session, if one of those cards really applies to one person, they take it and it says some things to do. And those things could be positive or negative. So it's not quite the typical level up, but it does add that, oh cool, I got a new ability, or oh no, my stat just went down, or oh no, I'm seeing things, or whatever. So yeah, I know a few people are excited about it. Hopefully, since I've got this like burst of wanting to get stuff done, it'll be part of that, and maybe I'll get back to it.
Cool. Yeah, obviously I'm a fan of it, and I know that games get abandoned and everything, but it's cool, and maybe some external playtesting will help a little bit. The thing that really, with that, besides the flipping the cards, which is a really awesome innovation, it's one of the only role-playing games ever where you play real people, just like ordinary people. And yeah, you might be a cop, maybe. You might be a school teacher. You might be a stay-at-home dad. You might be an electrician or whatever. And gaming just never really goes there, and this game captures that in a really cool way that is interesting. It's not like, we're going to play accountants in an office. It's still weird and creepy and fun, but the characters are very real.
Yeah, that was one of the other key things that really made it click together. At first, when it was playbooks, even though I was trying to go for normal people, like, once you have a playbook with special moves, you're not really a normal person. Like, the mechanic playbook, I think, had a very slimmed down variant of like a chopper gang and stuff. Like, it was, you were normal, but you weren't actually normal. Whereas now, the idea is to try and make it feel like you picked somebody from a phone book. Like, you roll and you could find out that you're playing like a black female cop, or a white guy stay-at-home parent, or like, all these things are random, which I kind of hope to poke people with a little bit. Like, I think people are going to be a little weirded out when like you roll your character, and I mean, even I mostly play white guy characters. Like, most of my characters resemble me in more ways than they don't. And yeah, it's going to be a bit of a weird experience the first time I sit down to play, and I'm like, oh, my guy is Japanese female bus driver, or like whatever combination of things come up.
Yeah, I think it's really cool having it be random like that, and having it also be kind of demographical in a way where there's this attention to kicking us out of our normal choices, and it's another step towards making the world feel very mundane and giving this foundation. So when things are weird, they really are, there's this contrast. We're not psychic agents from another dimension that can control demons. And now we're on the case of the serial killer who can control demons. Like, okay, that's a fun role-playing game. But like you said very early on, it's like the X-Files, but Mulder and Scully never come to the town. It's just this weird thing happens, and you might not ever learn what happens. There could be no resolution to the mystery. That's kind of what happened in one of our playtests. We got into some really weird stuff, and like, I don't know, like, we went on to the next set of characters in a different place, and that what happened in that first town, we don't know. We don't really know what that was.
And that was an important learning experience, and something that I need to, as I write up like an actual GM section, cover. Like, you can't bring as much weird as I brought, because that was one of the first play tests. Like, I brought the weird because I think we played 2 sessions of that game, and in the first one I felt like I didn't bring enough weird, so I overcompensated in the second one.
Yeah,
it doesn't quite work when you're trying to be that normal. Like, I think the GM guidance is like, don't give them something they can't come back from. Because I gave you something that, like, you left and you were like, no, we call the cops. Like, there's no other option here. Like, we saw stuff there that we're sure we saw. Like, and
I agree to an extent. Like, I do think GMing advice to tone it down a little is smart, but because of the serial nature of the game, it felt okay that we could just be in that situation. And in a normal game, you would, as a GM, like, for that third session, you'd be like, okay, how am I going to keep this campaign going? Like, things have gone off the rails and I don't know what to do. But in this game, it was like, okay, that story's over. And now we made new characters in a new town, in a new situation, and the threads of weirdness followed forward. But we had, and in a way it fed into that horror feeling too, because it was unresolved. It was like, what? I don't know what happens. Like, my character, what did she do next? I don't know. We just had to, like, close the curtain on that. So,
well, I remember correctly, like, we really closed off those characters. Like, they did call the cops, and, like, the building had just burned down, and, like, it was kind of like, and for those characters, it was over. Like, we just kind of said at the end, like, those characters, like, this is all they found out. Like, the rest of their lives, maybe we'll find out what happened in detail later, but, like, this was it. And it's nice to be able to cut there, because that's the problem that a lot of, I think, horror-ish games run into, is when you play the same characters over and over again, like, the weirdness accumulates. Like, you can't undo the weirdness.
Well, especially in a Lovecraftian sense, if you want to get that sense of sort of nihilistic meaninglessness, but then your investigators always find out what happened and figure out the cause and understand what it means, it kind of undercuts that feature, you know.
Yeah.
And having the stakes be, maybe you will figure it out, but there's no guarantee that you will, and that tension in play of, like, there's no reason to throw up your hands and go, well, forget it, we'll never find out, because you might. Yeah. But at the same time, you might not. And also, everyone can die. Also, someone can go totally mad. They can disappear, and we never find out what happened to them. Like, all kinds of great stuff can happen in that kind of disposable character way.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's got a lot of cool features to it.
The point where I pared down the characters into just, like, a few notes freed up so many opportunities to actually do the genre right. Because now, you know, you can, if your character, if the GM just says, and, like, oh, you're not playing that character anymore, and, like, nobody's heard from them, sorry, they're not part of this, and you're like, you didn't lose the hour or whatever you spent making the character, or even just, like, the few minutes that you spent, like, choosing your cool moves or whatever. You're like, oh, okay, like, here's the note card if you want to remember who they were. Let me roll up a new character.
You didn't really create them either. You rolled that you were Lady Bus Driver,
Yep.
And now you're going to roll a new guy. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's the demographic thing that you mentioned. So like coming up with all these, I decided like I don't want to just pull them out of thin air. Like let's look at least in the broadest sense, U.S. demographic data, which then raises the question why the U.S., which kind of led to another fun thing that is part of how I'm envisioning the game now. Is it's kind of about Americana, like dark Americana, which was a nice kind of circle of design of like I started out just wanting to make sure that the chance that you were of a certain ethnicity had some reason to it other than me deciding it. Like even though I had to round off some numbers to fit it to a simple die roll or whatever, like it at least somewhat reflects reality, and because it needs to reflect a reality, not like the entire world's demographics, it becomes interesting and it becomes focused, and it lets me hopefully, as I've tried to write up like a back cover of all things because that's fun to write a pitch for, talk about kind of the way that I think people have started viewing Americans have started viewing America. Yeah, it's fun. It gives the game, I think, some extra legs. But
yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's, like we were talking about writing, from kind of expressing your culture to some degree. And if we squint our eyes a little bit and say American culture, which isn't a thing really, but
yeah.
Outside America, it certainly is. And if I'm Gregor Hutton or Arrow or somebody who's interested in these games and is sort of fascinated with America, Sage Latorra's take on Americana would be an interesting lens to look at,
And I think the dangerous thing, like you said, is that there's no one, like, even if I'm doing my lens of it, like, I'm certainly not representative of most of America, but...
No, yeah, but that's what makes it interesting, I think, because it's not trying to be everything. It's trying to be a specific take on, like Ghost World or something like that. Like, it's this slice of the American thing as understood by you as a person and as a designer, and also very much funneled, like True Detective and the X-Files did, like funneled through something weird. So
and it's interesting because I actually think Monster Hearts kind of does that as well, though it's focused on maybe a different part of American culture. But like Adam has some stories of trying to play Monster Hearts with Americans and just being lost. They would bring up American typical high school things, and you'd be like, "What the heck is a Sadie Hawkins dance?"
Yeah, I've heard that from Europeans too. That understand Monster Hearts through Buffy and Vampire Diaries and stuff like that. That's the American high school, thing that was different from their own experiences. It's almost this fictional, like kind of the way I think of anime. Like they all have Japanese high school tropes, and I know them from watching anime, but they're totally alien to me as high school tropes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and hopefully someone will play on more. It's a good thing you reminded me, actually, because I've gotten so caught up with a bunch of these Dungeon World things that I forgot I had all these other projects I want to work on. So thanks for making sure that none of them get done, because now I want to work on all of them.
It's good. You mentioned last week, I think, that you were in this super creative mode. So I'm just going to keep throwing logs on the fire if I can.
Yeah, the tough thing is at some point I'm going to have to focus so that some of them actually get done. But the good news is I'm really liking the look of Juntu's Floating Ice Hell, Jason Morningstar and Portia Miller's adventure as I lay it out. And it's been fun because they've actually they gave us the text a long time ago. And it's just been on me to lay it out, and I've been super slow, my fault. But it's been fun going back because Marshall did kind of a lot of the Dungeon World-isms of it, like writing up some of the moves and monsters and stuff, and Jason did the overall, like, here's what's going on. But it's interesting, Marshall, who just had a really successful Kickstarter with a Warren, looking at his early Apocalypse World moves, I just sent him an email and I was like, do you want to, you and I sit down and revise these? Because I think we've both come a long way in how we design moves in the past.
Oh man, I flipped to the back of Apocalypse World and I I have moves in Apocalypse World. Before the game came out, I was writing moves, and I'm not embarrassed by them by any means, but yeah, there's a certain regret there that I look at them now and I go, oh man, wow.
Yeah.
We didn't really know what we were doing at back then. They're not bad moves. They're, it's just over the years, like, people have really developed the form or internalized it, I guess I should say.
Well, and one of the things that we're probably putting in a couple moves there, something that you and I have talked about, is something that I'm excited about with the Apocalypse World moves, is things that are based on like player skill / knowledge, for kind of lack of a better term. But in like one thing that we're working on, when you cross the ice fields, because there's kind of a glacial area around this frozen boat floating into a tropical area, you for each one of these certain, you name a leader, and for each one of these conditions that's true for them, they get +1 to the roll. And it's like you're all tied together. You've been on the ice before, and you have a path or something. I forget exactly what they are, but like there's no stat directly involved. It's all things that you do as a player, which we could think of as like fictional positioning and stuff. This is actually, oh man, I guess I'll throw this on there as the other thing that I'm working on that I was trying not to mention. My friend Isaac, who I was hanging out with at Gen Con, is a big fan of kind of the more naturalistic Westerns, not like Wild West kind of stuff, but almost in the mold that Old Messiah is. And he's been kind of pushing the idea of designing a game for a while. He's one of the artists of Dungeon World. And while we were at Gen Con, he brought this idea up again, and I was kind of like, oh, well, sure, someday. But then Sunday morning I woke up, or Monday morning, I woke up with like this idea for how it would work. And it's a variant on Apocalypse World where current idea is basically there's a few suggested types of roles, but they're not exhaustive. It's not like moves. And each one of them suggests a tag. Your characters just have tags, no stats. A tag that would be relevant. If you have that tag, you get a dice. And then 2 questions to ask about the situation. And for each one of those that you answer in favor of the player character, they get another dice. You roll them and count probably 5s and 6s as successes. 0 successes is failure. 1 success is like a mixed result, and 2 or more is success. But the idea is that you're setting up the GM to interrogate the fiction. Like it's much less about an arbitrary stat or interrogating the fiction to figure out which move applies. It's looking at like, oh, you're shooting a person. Okay, who here has like the quicker reflexes? And we just look at the people involved and are like, well, I don't know. I'm a school teacher who's never shot before, and he's a sheriff, so he's probably got faster draw than me. And you're like, okay, no dice for that. I'm kind of excited about it. It hasn't hit the table yet. It could be horrible, but it's this area that I've been wanting to explore a lot.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I think that branch of design is really interesting, and the balance between interesting interrogation and moving the game along is the crux, right? And
yeah, I'm worried that answering these questions all the time will get repetitive or boring. But
exactly, yeah, that's what makes it such an interesting design space right now, because there's not a lot of sort of common knowledge or practice in that area yet. There's workspace obviously, and some other Apocalypse World hacks have question-y type things, but it's tantalizing, it's interesting, and like I feel like there's hacks that have had one move that does something like that, and no one's gone whole hog yet and really like tried to make that the core, and it's cool. It's a really fun idea.
Yeah, I think it's worth a try. Like this game, the current idea of it is that each person's playing a family, and that these aren't necessarily like Eastern American families moving west, like but you're not from wherever the game's taking place, but families could also be like natives who have been driven east or driven west by expansion. You could be like a family, could be kind of a broad group. You could be like a outlaw gang or whatever. But like basically, character creation is starting out with a play sheet, which has kind of the basics of your family for you to customize in kind of an apocalypse world-y fashion. Like, here's my family name, and these are the members of my family, and they're all kind of like blanks with a few choices to make. But character creation is rolling on some random tables which tell you things that have happened as you came here, which could tell you like things like almost Oregon Trail style, like dysentery goes through your camp. Anybody with a frail tag, cross them off. They're already dead before you start play.
Yeah, nice.
And then when you're in play, the characters are just sets of tags so that you can jump between them fairly easily. You don't have to worry about different stats. And then you know, if it's a shooting challenge, you look for the steady tag, and then you answer the 2 questions and you roll your dice. And then tags are also indicate kind of how old your character is. So whenever a significant amount of time passes, if you have open tag slots, you get to add a new one. And if you're full of tag slots, you cross off one permanently. And that's how you get characters kind of doing the retire from play right off into the history thing.
Cool.
But, yeah, we'll see. It sprung to my mind fully formed, which is either a great sign or a horrible one.
Well, yeah, that's exciting. I love Western stuff, and that the naturalistic Western is one of my favorite things. The proposition, I think, is one of the great examples in that genre, and doing that justice in gaming would be very cool.
It'll be tough, but
it'll be tough. Yeah, but yeah. Before we go, perhaps it's up to you if we should tease.
I've been dancing around it the entire time.
I know the last project that I can think of anyway on the plate. We mentioned it online a little bit. You teased it on G Plus a little while ago.
Yeah. I've been meaning to actually post since apparently that wasn't enough of it. It's not a teaser until I have a picture or something. I'm meaning to post a picture.
You don't have to if you. I mean, we could just leave it teased if you want, or if you want.
I think we should. I've actually been meaning to post about it for a few days. I just haven't gotten around to it. You want to explain it?
Sure. It's so the short version is Vincent made a game called Apocalypse World Dark Age, and kind of his take on pseudo historical Game of Thronesy kind of thing with the Apocalypse World engine. We grabbed the first playtest and started playing and played through the subsequent iterations. But as Vincent iterated, he took the game in a different direction than the game at our table was going. And so we sort of shook hands with the game and let it walk off and continued to play the thing we were already playing with Vincent's blessing. He wasn't, it didn't bother him at all. That we sort of abandoned his game. Ultimately, so did he, I guess. But our game was something else, so we kept doing it and kept kind of like patching it and coming up with moves on the fly. And that game, as often happens in the Wednesday group, has sort of taken hold and has become this cornerstone game in our group. And at the bar months ago, somebody, I guess probably Sage, said, "Hey, this would be a cool like Apocalypse World hack. We should make it." And we all kind of said, "Not it." And
I was the slowest, so yeah.
They decided to take on the real work. I haven't really said yet what our thing is, but maybe you can say what that is.
Yeah, so like our thing is kind of Game of Thrones meets a more young adult take on it, like a teen novel. I guess teen isn't quite the right word, but like there's a bit of like a Hunger Games feel to it or something, like good, or even a little Harry Potter. Like I'm not a big fan of the way George R.R. Martin writes Daenerys, and the TV show kind of solved that by making Daenerys basically older. Like she no longer really acts like a teen, which is cool. Like she just became kind of this like early 20s super confident, like she's got everything together. And in the books, she kind of fluctuates between being that and like a 7-year-old girl or something. Like she seems dramatically young half the time, too old the rest. And we kind of found this middle ground for us that like it's a bit Monster Hardy. Like they're not necessarily how we were as teenagers, but it's how people tend to. It's how teenagers look in the Hunger Games or something like that. And it brought on this element of generations. Our characters, we have 2 characters of kind of a younger generation and one of an older generation, and these clashes of how the characters come together. And kind of the overarching element of play is that these old and kind of alien entities that sleep within the earth are waking up, which is a thing that maybe has happened before, and at least one of our characters is attuned to this. She knows this is happening. She has some power over it, which gives her some power to shape the world that's going to be happening after that. Because this is kind of an epochal change. Like the things will be different after these things wake up. So our game has been following these characters as they're not exactly friends, but they're not exactly enemies. Like at times there's been kind of shifting alliances between the 3 characters. It's been great fun. It's obviously we need a better, shorter pitch than this long explanation of like teen Game of Thrones, Hunger Games, etc. But it's great fun. It hits the kind of sweet spot that we were talking about earlier, where it's semi-lighthearted play, but serious for the characters with like some elements of drama. There's some of the skill elements that we've been talking about. Like this entire conversation, we've been dancing around it. We had a moment where our characters got into a fight and made the wrong mechanical / strategic choices and ended up losing something like hundreds of people in a shipwreck.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you did.
It was brutal. Oh my gosh. And it wasn't from like a bad dice roll or something, really. Like there were some rolls that contributed to it, but it was mostly that we as players were like, no, we know what the situation is, so we're going to choose these mechanical options, which is a cool thing. Like there's not a whole lot of that in Apocalypse World games, like we were discussing earlier, where there's that kind of like there's a lot of fictional stuff in that, where like your ability to position yourself is a big player skill, but there's less of the like, okay, I'm going to translate that into a mechanical choice and have some skill there. So yeah, I think it's really cool. We'll have to tease it more now that we've teased it this much.
Yeah, I'm excited. Sage has already done some initial playbooks and has taken some of the moves we've had in play and has shored them up into a document. And we're on a little hiatus now, but when we get back to it, I think it'll get even tighter. And it is this like coming of age thing with the old world passing away into something with this apocalypse, and then the younger world coming to power. And do the old ways hold true? Is the young generation following in their footsteps? Do they create a new world with new ideals? Do they let the world be destroyed to make something new? Do they try to save what's already there and also change the status quo? And it's kind of like rolling back Apocalypse World in a way to the pre and during the apocalypse. The world is changing, but the generational thing has been a real key factor in our game, where 2 of our characters are sort of teenagers, and Sage's character is a heir to a kingdom that he's the only survivor, so he has a throne that he can't claim. He has a birthright, I guess, kind of like the Sword in the Stone or something like that.
Yeah.
And Shannon's character is this herald of the new age and the monsters that are coming. But Paul's character is not even their parents' generation. He's an older guy who's a sort of a grandfather figure, the sort of Gandalf or Merlin character in a way.
Gandalf or Merlin who loves to sacrifice people.
Yeah, the bloodthirsty cultist version.
Yep.
Who's committed to the old ways and the old gods, and has been this great foil for the younger kids, and giving them this great contrast, like what does a king do in this situation? This is what you're meant to do. This is what you want to do. You know, the classic teen drama things, you know, but cast into this fantasy world.
And like we were talking about earlier, one of the with the multiple levels of conversation, something that comes up a lot when we play this game is, well, your characters might do that because like you're the rule, like you're the new generation. Like this, we kind of have the conversation at the table of like, you know, this isn't how anybody else would approach this. Like my character has some ideas that like, he doesn't just have a right to rule, he has a bit of an obligation as well, and like a responsibility to people and stuff. And John will just flat out say like, wait, you realize that like the older generation, for them it's probably just, you know, you're king, like you're in charge, you don't, this is your divine right. And it's been fun because we as players can then more quickly communicate like, oh no, I know that I'm deliberately changing things, or like, oh sorry, like I thought this would be typical for people here. Which brings, like, another big thing has been culture. Like we've been interacting with all these cultures as our characters try to build kind of a support structure for their vision of the future, or in my character's case, overthrowing the people who stole his throne. Same difference. And to do that, like we've interacted with all these different cultures, which is something that we've started to kind of canonicalize into our moves, the core moves, so that you're interacting with a person's culture and having a culture is a thing. And I hope we can do that justice. I'm worried that that'll fall down in some places, but it's an interesting idea to have the idea of interacting with somebody's culture and knowing how to behave in their culture and knowing what you can expect as the cultural norms there. I think that'll be hopefully really fruitful for other people.
Yeah, the manipulate, or one version of manipulation in this structure, the leverage that you have is expectations. Like this person in this position or in this cultural community or in a generational sense or whatever sort of box you're trying to leverage, you can leverage expectations. You can say, you know, you're supposed to be a dutiful child here, so I'm going to lean on you to be that, or you're supposed to be a bloodthirsty believer in the old gods, so I'm going to lean on you to do that and follow through on your ritual. And there's all these expectations pushing on the characters, and at PC to PC, you can use that, you know, as a hook. It's almost like it's something people struggle with sometimes in Apocalypse World. Like, how do I know when I have leverage on someone, and what does it mean? Can I manipulate them or not? And the way that Sage has structured these sort of heritage things gives you these very clear handles. You can reach out and be like, okay, you're a mountain person, and this is what they believe, and that doesn't mean this individual is going to behave that way. It means that there's pressure on you from your community to behave that way, and what are you going to do in the moment?
And you as a player can do kind of the same thing. It's one of the other big influences here is Dune, and because I just read that, as I mentioned earlier, and it stuck with me. And like the going into a person's culture and knowing that, you know, here, like giving a gift of water or something like demands respect, and so you as a player can be like, oh no, like I'm doing this thing for their culture, and that triggers the move, and you can make a roll, and maybe you are doing it kind of in the right way, and you're actually constraining their actions. Like if you come in with a gift of water, and that kind of demands from somebody here being observed by others, their friends, like if they don't respond in some way, they're train themselves. Like there's pressure on them to do that, and if you roll well enough, you leverage that pressure. If you roll badly, they're like, who are you? Like that you're an outsider, this doesn't apply to you or whatever. And I think that's an interesting place in our play, and it's an interesting place that not too many Apocalypse World games have gone yet. for the most part. So we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah,
and I'll post a real preview.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to getting back to that someday, whenever our Wednesday group meets again.
Yep.
It'll be a while, but
it'll be a while. But the nice thing is that'll give me a little bit more time to work out a couple of these things. I actually have 2 playbooks in the works that we haven't used that aren't based on Vincent. So that'll be interesting.
And there is something about, we've talked about this before, there's something about this, and I don't know if it's our group yet or if it's the game, the playbooks and how clear they are, or whatever it is, but we've taken breaks in this game before, sometimes for a month or 2 maybe.
Yeah.
And
we didn't even a longer break when we playtested Undying for.
Oh yeah, right. But we just get right back into it, like we haven't missed a session. There's like a 5-minute, like, oh yeah, that was happening. Okay, cool, and then we're just in. And I'm curious to see if that is something that can be captured, or if that just is like a thing that's occurred in our local game that's completely, isolated, or if there's some feature of what we're doing that lends itself to that kind of, I don't know, easy in and out. I don't know.
Yeah, there's got to be some intersection of it, because that doesn't happen to all games for us. But
yeah, no, sometimes we just they fade away and we just quit caring. But this game that hasn't happened, so I don't know. I suspect the characters are a big part of it because they're so iconic that we commented the last time we played that we could just pass the character sheets to the left and play the game. Like everyone at this point, the characters are so well realized that you could play Aya and Paul could play your knight, and we could just do it. So
yeah,
that's been cool.
Yeah, it's been really cool, and it coming from like the Game of Thrones of the playbooks are not directly one character. They're all aspects that apply to at least 2 characters, and each character fits at least 2 of the playbooks in a lot of ways. So like Shannon's character is kind of Daenerys, but kind of also who was the other one that stood out for her? She's kind of some of the Starks. My character, who's kind of the outlaw heir, is part Theon Greyjoy, but part like Robb Stark, and part Daenerys even. Like all people who have this like lost throne or lost power that they want to claim. There's just so many great overlaps there that makes it's not the simple approach of like there's a pretty good Battlestar Galactica Apocalypse World hack out there, but each of the playbooks is like, you're the president, and it's like, okay, like I know which one character from Battlestar Galactica I could be, and I could probably take it a different direction, but like there's no interesting middle point there. Because like Paul's character is part Maester and part Red Priest, and yeah, it's so great. It's interesting to try to distill those things down, and a lot of that's what Vincent already did. But I'm hoping these couple other playbooks that I have that bring in a few other ideas continue the same trend.
Yeah, and I feel like now too, because when we started, it was kind of unclear what the fiction backing it was supposed to be. So we kind of went with our gut and ended up kind of going in that slightly Dune, slightly Game of Thrones, slightly young adult fiction direction, because that's kind of us as players. That's what we're interested in. But especially now, like by the time the game comes around, I feel like post Game of Thrones backlash will be in full effect, and people will be. I'm already fully there, but by the time this game comes out, I feel like most people will be totally fed up with Game of Thrones bullshit. And having this, another great thing to do in gaming is when you're like, oh man, I just want it to do that right. I want it to do that thing justice, because it was so shitty the way they ruined it with whatever. And I've enjoyed that with this game to like sort of reclaim what's cool about something like Game of Thrones and discard all of that just fucking garbage that has accumulated onto that property over the years.
Yeah, and I'm one of the the always hopeful people who is like, well, once the next book comes out, it's all like they'll finally be able to move the TV show forward. I'm sure it'll be good. But that's me about most things. I'm always the hopeful one who's like, I'm sure it'll turn out okay. Like, I have one episode left of season 2 of True Detective, and I'm still like, it'll come together. Like, they've got one more episode.
Oh, that's so sad. What a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Should we call it here? And yeah.
I think that's good. Thanks for hanging out and chatting. That was really fun.
No problem. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We should do it again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. I will put some stuff in the description here, linking to various things we've talked about if they're available in different places.
Yeah, exactly like 2 of the things that I mentioned as things that I've worked on are actually available. But yeah.
There's an old Messiah link that might still be active. I can't remember.
I need to double check. My intention has been for a little while to clean it up a little bit and then put it as pay what you want on drive-through.
Okay. All right. Well, by the time this is up, you'll probably have done that already. So
hopefully.
Cool. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. Feel free to comment below. We'll answer your questions or whatever you've got, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yep.